A real estate lawsuit settlement sends shockwaves through the real estate world.
The National Association of Realtors has agreed to pay $418 million in damages.
Overall confusion and frustration continue to reign.
So this 6% commission between the buyer and the seller's brokers is no longer going to be the norm.
The old model of the seller paying the entire commission has sort of been thrown out the window.
The settlement would also allow buyers and sellers to negotiate fees and compensation with agents up front.
So if I'm buying a house now, I negotiate with the realtor to see how much he or she is going to get paid?
Those rules may lead to lower housing prices, but some fear it could also mean fewer agents.
Change, it creates fear. It's natural, but fear never leads to best. Today, with the industry changes in mind that are about to impact all of us, we've assembled so that we can help eliminate fear. And how do you do that? You do it by preparation. You do it by education that ensures that we can all continue to do what we've always done, provide home buyers and home sellers the best experience possible. So we're here today to handle hard best. Buying a home has often been described as the American dream. While many of us take it for granted, it defines success and prosperity for most of our neighbors and customers. It's also true that buying a home is the single biggest financial investment, the single biggest financial investment that most Americans will ever make in their lives. Historically, this journey has been guided by you, a professional realtor who aims to help home buyers minimize the risk in the transaction and maximize their return on investment. When the home buying journey is successful, the professional realtor educates and serves tirelessly. You know what I'm talking about. Day and night, weekends, and even holidays if necessary. While March 15th, 2024 will bring significant changes to the home buying process, it does not alter, in my opinion, humbly, what matters most. One, the significance of the financial investment home buyers are making. And number two, the need, therefore, for a professional realtor to educate, to serve, and to lead home buyers on their journey. Today, we're here to discuss two important dates, March 15th, 2024, and August 17th, 2024. And Ned may tell us a third date. Let's start by discussing what happened on March 15th and what will happen on August 17th, what changes are occurring, and how to excel in this evolving landscape. In line with our mission at Supreme Lending of serving others before itself, we've invited two of the industry's best and brightest voices. Ned Blumenthal is an industry-leading real estate attorney here to offer expert advice as we navigate changes to our industry. Michael Cheever is a former world-class NFL athlete turned realtor turned COO of one of the largest real estate firms in the Southeast, and has been hugely successful throughout his career, whether it's in sports or now in real estate. Ned, I'm going to start with you.
All right.
If you don't mind, I have a few questions for you. You were behind this whole problem, were you?
I was nowhere near this problem.
That's not one of the questions I had in mind for him today. Anyway, you weren't behind the problem, you weren't near the problem, but you do understand the problem. So
I do.
We're thankful that you're here today. So March 15, 2024, there was news, right? It was arguably one of the biggest news stories in real estate history. Yep. Just the news of what took place. Tell us what specifically happened, if you would.
Sure. So there was a settlement of a national class action, lots and lots of details of it. But at the end of the day, what happened is that NAR agreed to substantial rule changes. And that is what is fueling all of this, is the NAR rule changes and everybody getting ready for them and learning how to navigate through them so they avoid real estate jail.
We're not talking about just any little lawsuit. We're talking about like a $418 million, roughly, right?
It's almost real money. Yeah,
it's real money, right?
Yeah, the part of what has always been challenging to me in understanding this, and maybe to a lot of the folks who are tuning in, is that the way we have done stuff in Georgia is radically different and frankly much more advanced than the way it's done in most parts of the country. And so to sort of understand where we are and where we're going, you sort of have to understand where lots of other folks have been. And that is largely buyers have been kept in the dark by and large about commissions. They have been told lots of areas in the country don't have buyer brokerage, not the way we do in Georgia. And most areas of the country don't have on their forms negotiated commissions where the buyer negotiates a commission with their broker. They're largely told, oh, don't worry about it. You don't have to pay a dime. The seller pays it. My services are free to you. And many times they don't even know what their broker is being paid until they get to the closing. Mm-hmm. Once they see the CD, then, oh, gee, there's a commission on there. But they were told before then, don't worry about it.
You know, I knew it was out there, but when the news first broke, first thing I thought is if I invited our 100 last customers, buyers in it, and asked them, were you happy with your experience? For the most part, they would have said, of course, very happy. And then if I'd asked them the second question, did your realtor get paid? They would have, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how, right? And then how much they would have gotten paid. But I think the issue is now we're moving into a somewhat different era. And certainly the news, as we watched some of the clips back in March that took place when this was first announced, you know, what we all know today is that news is maybe news, and sometimes it's just marketing, advertising news. But I think this is going to be a big news story. So that's really what we're trying to do today. Get prepared, further prepared, better prepared, so that you can have the kind of conversations you need to with friends, family, buyers, sellers, because we are going to go through some change. So is the legal issue this settlement with NAR and the lawsuit, is it settled yet? Or is this event kind of like at a certain place today and it's not static, that it's finally settled? It'll be a dynamic event that we'll all deal with for some time.
The answer to those questions is yes.
Yes.
Some things are static and settled and others are not. One thing that is at least temporarily settled and static is that NAR rule changes are coming, and they're coming in a month. And that's happening. Where we still have areas of flux or that the court still needs to give final approval to this whole settlement. So it's a little bit odd in that we have rule changes going into effect pursuant to a settlement that hasn't been fully signed off on by the court. And that's due to some procedural issues. When you settle a class action, which is what this was, you have to have a waiting period. The court does a preliminary approval, which they got, and then you have to wait for people to object, see if there are any appeals filed, things like that. And then the court finally signs off on the final approval. It's rare for a judge not to grant final approval once they have given preliminary approval.
Except if I was a seller and I was one of the class action participants, I was going to get how much in this suit now?
I've heard different figures, but somewhere in the $10 or $11 range.
So it's a $418 million settlement, and the class action participants are going to get $12 to $15, right?
There are a lot of them.
Might get a cup of coffee for you these days. Anyway, so wow, just an awful lot of stuff that's out there. What is cooperative compensation? You know, you hear that term. So tell us what it is. What's your definition of it?
It's basically just the listing broker offering to pay the buyer's broker. They're cooperating with them. They are offering to compensate them. And that's one of the things that's also been handled differently in Georgia by and large than in other parts of the country. A lot of the rules and multiple listing services across the country have said you must offer to pay a commission to a buyer's broker, and it must be half. And that's not been the case by and large in Georgia, but that has been something that's out there. And that's largely what fueled the lawsuit, were claims of, hey, wait a second, if I'm the seller, I don't get access. I don't get the good stuff. I don't get into the multiple listing service, which is what I want, unless I'm offering to pay double, and half of it's going to the folks that are trying to get the house from me for less than I want to sell it. That doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I always feel like when there's change taking place in a business that, you know, if buyers and sellers, I've never heard a complaint about this topic. And I've been involved in 375,000 transactions in my career. which is fascinating. I've also bought 16 homes personally, and I've never, by the way, asked realtors to discount their commissions. I've just respected the professional service that they provided. And so I think once the news clears, then it's just a question of what's required differently as of the date that's coming up, of the participants that are in the audience today. How exactly do they have to go about that, which we'll get to in a few minutes, Michael, to give us some insight about what does that look like from your expert perspective. So Ned, back to you. And again, I want to remind everyone this is not Ned's doing. Okay, so
I'm part of the solution.
Part of the solution, right? Exactly. What's going to happen on August 17th? That's the date, I guess, that NAR has agreed that there will be
the rule changes go into effect.
Right? So some people may already be practicing those rule changes.
Yep.
But August 17th is the day that those rule changes are actually going to be effectively, changed,
right,
if you will.
You can comply with them today. You could comply with them 2 months ago. It's just they're going to be mandatory starting on the 17th. And really, like the GAR form set has all been updated and modified to try to address all these rule changes, and those forms are out now. So folks can be using this and doing this right now, whether even before we've hit the rule change. But really, there are, I guess, two major things that folks need to focus on. One of the rule changes is that you are required to have a conversation about commissions, or at least have a written document about commissions, who's paying it, how it's going to be calculated, or how much it is before you take a buyer to go tour a property. So that's a significant change. The other significant change is that it will not be permitted for anybody to offer a co-op commission, or even frankly mention the word commission in a board-owned, realtor-owned multiple listing service.
Which means what? What do they have to do? They just have to stay away from that conversation.
So yeah, the norm up until the 17th, there's been a field where you put in the amount of commission that you're offering to pay to the buyer's broker, and that will go away in board-owned multiple listing services. It may not go away in non-board-owned multiple listing services. They're not bound by the settlement agreement unless they opt into it. But by and large, anyone who's a realtor should not be putting any offer of compensation to a buyer's broker in any multiple listing service, so that they avoid running afoul of the rule change and potentially end up getting themselves dragged into another lawsuit. But the thing is, it's only multiple listing services. You can have a billboard. You can have your website. You can
do sign language.
You can have it tattooed on your forehead. Right. It can be anywhere, just as long as it's not a multiple listing service or a surrogate for it. You can't use an aggregator. So you can't go out. Anyone who's got the idea, I'm going to go out and I'm going to form my own. I'm not going to call the multiple listing service, but I'm going to list everybody's commissions. That you can't. Well, that
brings up another point, right? If the court and there's a settlement, and this is what NAR has agreed to do vis-a-vis disclosure. If I called you and we had this conversation, and you're a lawyer, if I called you, you would, in our conversation, if I was curious about hiring you as a lawyer on my behalf, you would tell me that you're going to charge me.
Sure. Yeah.
You would, right?
I would.
Like, I'm going to charge you.
Yes.
Okay?
If you find an attorney who doesn't,
right? So, no, but in every professional service, whether it's accountants or lawyers or doctors, we all understand that these are professionals just like you, who provide a professional service just like you, a valued service just like you do to your buyers and your sellers. And of course, consumers expect to pay a fee. Yep. The deal is we're just in this kind of weird place where it's been this way for so long, the way it's been handled, that sellers have effectively been paying the commissions, and consumers maybe didn't know, but you had to really know these folks weren't driving around and working for free. But now that it's changing, let me ask this question, because our industry, and you're well familiar with my industry.
Sure.
I've had to disclose my fees to consumers when they make a loan application forever. In fact, in 2015, we went through TRID, which I've shared in the past was not a dance. It was a new disclosure, required disclosure. We have to disclose fees, and we disclose them up front, and consumers then we have to explain all the fees. We not only have to disclose our fees, we got to disclose estimates on everybody else's fees in the transaction, and they expect us to do a really good job of doing that. The federal government oversights all of that. While this is in the court system, is it likely, since 18% of the GDP, the U.S. economy, is driven by housing, is it likely the federal government at some point gets involved and creates a standard for the whole country, since it sounds like state to state, MLS to MLS, there's going to be a lot of nuances and differences. It would seem like at some point they may get involved. What are your thoughts on that, if you have any?
It's across the board. Nobody really knows what's going to end up happening. The big wild card at the moment is the Department of Justice. They had originally cut a deal with NAR where they were going to stop trying to investigate and stop trying to get involved, and they got the Court of Appeals in DC to let them out of that deal. So now they're free to go in and do whatever it is that they want to do. I don't know this, but my suspicion is that the Department of Justice would, if it could, would prefer to have it so that you can't pay a commission from a listing broker to a buyer's broker. I don't think they can legally do that, but I think that's in the back of the entity's mind, if you will. I think that's kind of where it wants to head, but I don't see any way that it could do that would be upheld. But nobody knows for sure.
And the court system's a little busy these days, I understand. So
one or two cases going on.
One or two cases, right? Whether this gets in front of them as a priority sometime soon, we wouldn't expect that to take place.
No, we're living in the real world, and we're heading into an election. And who wants to be the administration or the potentially incoming administration who's promoting making home buying process harder? Nobody wants to try to take on the American dream of home ownership and make it more challenging. So I don't think we're going to get a lot of play with this at the federal level, at least until next year.
Well, and it's interesting because one of the cabinet seats is HUD, because housing is such an important part of the U.S. economy and otherwise. So it will be interesting at some point, because when you see industries go through changes like this and there's no absolute clarity and there's standards that are different all over the place, and they're all dealing with, consumers, be them black, white, brown, you'll ultimately then usually find that the federal government will get involved and opine on some of it. But for another day, that time. Let's shift to you, Michael. Okay. So you're well versed in all the information, of course, because of your role that Ned has just shared with all of us, and you're also responsible for coaching several thousand people. How well do you sleep at night? Since this news came out, right? You were like, wow, I thought I was getting into this really great deal, and now I've got to be responsible for this. So, I would just tell the audience, based on knowing you really, really well, your real estate journey, you've always been hugely successful prior to that, and you've overcome adversity in all different areas of your life. So you're in good hands if you're in the audience, and Keller Williams or Michael or any of the firms that we do business with. Frankly, they're all great firms. So, but much of the change on August 17th and beyond, some of the important things will remain the same. And I want to share with the audience, because these are facts that you can have here today, because I think fear keeps us from focusing on facts. And facts are important. Last year, 89% of all home buyers in America and home sellers used realtors, 9 out of 10. That number has not changed over the years. That is a pretty standard number. By the way, average commission rates last year in the U.S., 5.5%. That's not down materially. And you would imagine sellers could have paid less because they were actually getting more than they were asking for at times. Here are a couple of things that are really important that help indicate or inform me maybe where this thing goes. 38% of home buyers in America today are first-time home buyers. And you know what I know about them, because I finance them? That the two biggest hurdles that home buyers, first time home buyers have is one, their credit, move that aside. The second one is the down payment and cash to close. So in my humble opinion, for 40% of all the home buyers, they're not going to be able to pay in cash the realtor commission. They're not, because they don't have the cash. They work to get enough cash so they can do a transaction, getting another 3% or whatever the rate winds up being for their commissions, whatever they're winding up compensating you to do that. It's, in my opinion, very unlikely. In fact, in a lot of our transactions, I was telling Michael that we actually get to the finish line and we do what's called a lender credit, because those first-time home buyers don't even have enough to close. They didn't know. They're come up just short. And so we credit $200, $500, $700 just to get them across the finish line. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. So I'm a realtor, Michael. August 17th, August 18th, representing a home buyer starting that date. What do I do differently?
Well, thank you. First of all, Pat, I'd like to say thank you and Supreme for doing this, for getting out in front of something that can create a lot of fear and uncertainty to educate, which is something that I know is near and dear to your heart. And I'd like to also say, Ned, you're a big part of why we're here. And that's in the state of Georgia, which is way out in front of a lot of other states. So I've been very thankful to have the opportunity to go around and train specifically on this. And y'all, we're making some pretty minor changes to the Georgia contract. And so Ned, you're a big part of this. Thank you. Look, where this is at specifically with the changes for the 17th, start now. The forms are uploaded. The changes have been made. This is best practices. And quite frankly, the conversation really is just more about an update and transparency. That's really the fundamental change in this. It's not that agents used to get paid and they're not going to get paid in the future. It's about the conversations that you're having with people about what you said, right? And we make a joke about it, but honestly, if you were to find an attorney that didn't charge for their services, how much value would be implied in the service they provide? Very little, right? And so my encouragement relative to the 17th is get out in front of it now. Start having these conversations internally about what are the new ways to explain the forms in transparency and honesty and clarity with your client, and start implementing them now. I wouldn't wait until the 17th.
Yeah, because we're going to see on the listing side, right? The date is going to make a difference on the listing side, but people don't have to wait to that date to make these changes, correct?
Yeah, they can go ahead and start using it today.
And you imagine, as you're encouraging on the buy side people to make those changes on the list side, you know, some sellers are hearing or have heard of this issue, and we're already going down that road. So to the extent that that's a date that's out there where there's a requirement to do things differently based on the NAR settlement, that's not a date we need to wait for. And we just need to be more transparent. I mean, there's no service provider, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, doctor, lawyer, accountant, attorney, who works for free. And the work you do, you know, I mentioned when we opened, weekends, nights, holidays, whatever it takes, that's what home buyers and sellers expect of you. And the reality of it is that I've always felt, I told you about 16 houses, I've always felt the work that's been done has been exceptional by the professionals that have represented me. And so I've been happy to pay those fees. When the news first broke, there was a mix-up because I listened to it all. Accurate and inaccurate information. By the way, that would be news.
Yeah.
The news that we hear today, right? I mean, there's people who they're not responsible, so they just say what they say. And I think we're going to hear an awful lot of that. And by the way, don't underestimate that this is going to be louder in August, because that's when the actual required change goes into place. And it'll be before the election, but there'll be a lot of news. There's over 1 million realtors, so there's going to be an awful lot of conversation about this in the media. How should realtors handle the conversation? So there's going to be news that's going to be out there, Michael. How do they handle the news conversation? I mean, are you recommending they send articles, videos, or just handle the conversation themselves? Because, you know, when I watched the initial release of this information, and we had a montage earlier, you know, there's a lot of hysterics and misinformation. That's pretty normal. What are your thoughts about how does a realtor convey to a consumer the accurate, less emotional truth about what's happened?
Authentically, right? So however you communicate best with your clients is the right way for you to do this. So if you feel like, I feel like this is a great touch, I feel like this is a tremendous opportunity for agents to touch their database and say, hey, have you heard? Do you have any questions? Love to connect with you and answer any questions, or just love to connect with you, period, right? This is a tremendous opportunity to separate who are the trusted advisors in this industry and who are the functionaries, right? Who are the people that are hiding behind some business practices that are now
Going to get exposed.
They're going to get exposed. It's creating transparency in our industry. And the trusted advisor in the future is going to have more clients and make more money. And the functionary is going to have fewer clients and make less.
I want to try something out for you and for our audience, because I've given a lot of thought to this topic because, of course, because we've had to disclose our fees for, 38 years that I've been in the business, running the business, I've always thought of it through the eyes of the consumer. I have to create value. I have to have a value proposition and speak to them. But it also brings you pretty quickly to what do they want and need? What do consumers want and need? And here's what I would just say to you. Try it out with me. Home buyers, they really want to find and consummate a contract for a home that fits their needs. That's what they want. They want to be a part of the American dream, buy a home. They want to get a contract and finish the contract. So they need somebody to represent them and help them through that process and get a contract done. And finally, they want to get the home that meets their needs. They want to minimize the transaction risk. What they don't know will indeed, and by the way, single biggest investment they'll ever make in their lifetime. What they don't know, people always understand. That's why if I gave you $500,000 and said, go out and invest your money, you'd go get an advisor and you'd pay them. And they would disclose that you're going to pay them, right? So not really any different. So they want to minimize their risk and they want to maximize their experience. They want the experience to be as stress-free as possible. So that's on the home buyer side. We good so far?
Absolutely.
Does that make sense, right? That's what they want and need. On the home seller side, really simple. They want to sell their home. Wow. The second thing they want to do is they want to minimize the risk, but they want to maximize their proceeds. So when they list a home, I always have said that sellers show you all their cards. Because based on the commission fee on the listing, they tell you exactly what they're hoping, praying to net. So it's a mathematical reality and a formula. So I know exactly what it is that I'm dealing with. There's a sales price, net the commission cost, whatever that might be. If it's less in the future than it was in the past, I know what this seller is hoping and praying for, and I can look at all the comparables and all that kind of good stuff. That makes sense?
Perfect sense.
Is there anything,
spot on?
Yeah, is there anything we want to add to buyers and sellers? So I always shared that because sometimes we make more complicated that which is simple. And that creates fear because there's too much going on. I just want to remind all of us that buyers and sellers, they want something, and you are professionals to guide them on that journey, whether they're buying or selling. Average commission rate, Michael, last year in the US, 5.5%. Do you expect commission rates to decrease after the change takes effect?
I believe that for some people, they are going to make less in the future. And those people, I believe, are the ones who typically do a low number of transactions. They kind of float into the industry when someone calls and says, oh, hey, it's a friend or a family member, or there's somebody that they bumped into at wherever, and they have a license. They do, again, a very few number of transactions on an annual basis. They may or may not be an expert on their market, right? And I believe that those people they're at risk of being affected at a higher level, right? The people that are trusted advisors, that are local market experts, that serve their clients at a high level, I believe those people are going to continue to grow their businesses and thrive.
Yeah. So the only thing that's really it feels like one of the things that's going to change is we've got to be more thoughtful about communicating the value proposition. I know the gentleman that has his name on the front of the company had a famous quote when this first came out. We didn't put that on video today, right? So, But it was really that you have to define your value proposition going forward, because when you tell someone that you're going to charge them a fee, their thought immediately is, can I pay less, until they understand what you're going to do for them that justifies the fee, right? And the good news is, most of you that are in the audience, when the phone rings, it's someone who's referred to you that was trusted by the person who's calling. So they call because so-and-so, friend of yours, family member, past customer said, I should do business with you. So they start out with trust. Then it's just a question of value proposition, which has been brought up a lot recently. And I thought we would start with, well, a definition. So a value proposition, what is it? And by the way, every great company, and you're a company, every great company has a very specific value proposition. But starting out with what it is, it's an inbuilt innovation, service, or feature intended to make a company or a product attractive to customers. So when you start out with what a customer's buyers want and what do sellers want, then you build value in and around that. And I thought what I would do today, and in support of the organization that I'm responsible for every day, is just share with you a bit about our value proposition, so that we can give you some sense for, how we think about it. And you've seen this, many of you have seen this before. We do proof too, right? So saying you're the best at something, I always ask people, what does best specifically mean? So ours is 18 days, our average app to closing. Close on time, by the way, we identified this years and years and years and years ago. Most people think the lowest cost is the best for mortgages until they don't close on time and their truck is in the parking lot, in which case they realize that the most important thing is that the keys got to change. Oh, and by the way, if you're a realtor, close on time, fund on time means that you get paid on time, right? And that's still going to be the way it is in the future if you get this right and close on time. Customer satisfaction. Customers ultimately want to feel like they were valued. And finally, we do 8-day closings because if you need to compete in cash and you're actually getting your customers to finance, you need to be able to compete with cash. And we do 8-day closings, and we do them all the time, believe it or not. So I want to just share with you quick. Say yes, and say it often. We think you'll agree that's a good thing, and say it fast. Close on time guarantee. We have a $5,000 money back guarantee. We give our consumers their earnest money back if we don't close the transaction on time after contingencies for any reason. Speed, as I've already mentioned. We also offer, and maybe you're going to want to add this to your value proposition. If you close a transaction with Spree, we offer the customer a go forward $2,000 credit. So when they refinance, not if, when they come back and they get a $2,000 credit. If you don't offer credit for them to do business with you again, maybe you'll want to in their next transaction, maybe not, but that's part of our value proposition. And also Supreme Essentials, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes, which is a fabulous program that we offer that gives a $1,000 credit to the customer. That's how we create our value conversation, right? And when we're at the point of sale, they call us, we're disclosing fees. We tell them this is what you can expect. We're going to close you on time, so your dogs, cats, kids are all going to move in on time. It's a big deal, right? And then we're going to do a number of other things. Guarantee it's closed on time. We're also going to give you a $2,000 credit in the future, X, Y, and Z. How should an agent communicate? What are the 2 or 3 or 4 things value-wise you recommend an agent communicate in justifying, because you're now in our club? Customers are going to ask, what am I paying for? Right? I can get it cheaper. What am I paying for?
100%. Separate this out into 2 conversations because they are unique conversations relative to the value that a realtor provides. One is to a seller, right?
Yep.
And there's a set of duties that you perform for a seller, right, that are different than the things that you perform for a buyer, okay? So agents are used to having a value presentation, a value proposition.
On the seller side.
On a listing presentation. Yep. Because you're very used to sitting down and you're used to going through, here's what's important to you. You understand what the time
and you're disclosing your fee.
100%. Then you're going to go through, hey, here's how we're going to accomplish what's important to you. Here's what we charge to accomplish what's important to you. Do we have an agreement? Yes. Cool. Then we have a listing agreement. So we're used to, as an industry, going through the value proposition on the listing.
Whether that's marketing, staging, whatever
All
it
of
is,
it, right?
that's all part of the value proposition.
100%. And different agents offer different types of value or sets of, but functionally, we're going to market the home, right? We're going to, get it sold, right? And
because they want it sold and they want to maximize how much they get.
Every seller wants the same thing. Most amount of money, least amount of time, fewest amount of hassle.
Right.
So it's very common to have that conversation on the listing side. On the buyer side, that conversation, because of the way the industry is set up, you can go online, push a button, and an agent will meet you at the door at a time that you've agreed on, right? Now, that convenience is going to be limited for a lot of consumers. I don't know how they're going to feel about that, right? Okay. However, a value proposition on the buyer side looks like an actual buyer's consultation. It looks like sitting down with the buyer, understanding not just what they want. Why do they want it, Pat? Ned, why is it important, right? So once you understand that, hey, here's why this is important, now you're able to advise them on how to accomplish that problem.
So in the past, on the buy side, it feels like it's been really relationship driven. And on the list side, it was relationship driven. But because the commission's getting fully disclosed, the value proposition has been completely teased out. So now we're on the other side of the transaction and probably needing to tease out the buyer side. I bought a home in Florida and it burned down a couple of years ago. And, of course, the market was shallow on inventory. We all know that. I was trying to get another home. And I'd used the same agent for 20 years, had bought a number of homes in Florida. And when one came up, I said, hey, listen, I'll fly down tomorrow to look at it. No, you're going to need to make an offer today. And I had never not used a structural engineer for an inspection because I'm not good with hammers and wrenches and screwdrivers. So it's the only time. So I said to this agent, I said, get me the best inspector. He got me an inspector. We inspected the property. Everything was fine. We closed the transaction. My painter got on the roof. Foot went through the roof. We pulled up the roof. There was $250,000 of water damage. And I called the agent. I said, is the best inspector the one that finds nothing? So as I looked at this, we have a step-by-step series of milestones on the buyer side. There's a difference between a condo and a townhome and a single family home. What are those differences? Well, everybody knows. No, they don't. And then there's the write a contract. Everybody knows what's in a contract. No, they don't. And everybody knows about inspections. No, they don't. They don't know about HVAC. They don't know about roofing. They don't know. Most consumers don't know much about any of these things. So to me, it seems like it's waiting to be developed, this specificity of the value proposition, but it's easy to see how it could be done, relatively easy. All right. Do you expect historically the sellers paid the commission? That's what's happened, right? And we're making a transition now to where that still may be the case, but it may be that the buyer's paying the buyer's agent directly. I keep coming back to if 38% of the consumers are first-time home buyers and they don't have the money, and I'm not a first-time home buyer and I've always had the seller pay the commissions, you expect that we're just going to go back to that place where, for the most part, sellers will be paying the commissions and we just need to negotiate those commissions into the transaction? Is that where you think things go?
To answer that question, I just look at...
We'll cut this out so that if down the road it's not exactly right.
Answer it both ways, and then we get right. Answer it both ways, and then we'll have it.
Now, are you a lawyer?
Yeah. Here's the way I look at this: is as agents, fundamentally, stop thinking about agents. Start thinking about buyers and sellers. Start thinking about your clients. Right. I just like to bring things to the simplest place. And so, for a buyer, if they have this much in funds to go and make this transaction happen, then you advise them on how to structure that offer. And this either becomes the right deal for them or it doesn't. Listen, we have that same conversation relative to price. We have that same conversation relative to taxes, relative to HOA fees, relative to all these things. We have the same conversation with them. This is not a different conversation. It's the same conversation. It's how do we advise them to get them to what their goals from a timing standpoint and the home that they want. And then how do we go and negotiate that from the market to make that happen? And if that looks like the seller paying commission, then that's what that looks like. But that can be structured in an offer. They've done a great job. I'll say I've reviewed the new forms. They're fantastic. There's forms for you to use. I recommend that over writing your own stats.
Yes.
But that's really, I just believe that Pat, Ned, industry, we need to start thinking more about our clients as we think about these conversations and less about our commission.
Got it. Yeah, it's interesting. We do have a slide on before August 17th and after August 17th. I just thought it was worthwhile putting up because it kind of simplified things for me. I didn't really, so what does this look like on the left-hand side? Let's say there was a $400,000 sales price historically. The average in America was 5.5%, $22,000. That seller net was $378. So that's a comparable now. You all heard a comparable. That's a comparable. It's out there prior to August 17th. What does that mean? That means the seller, when they put it on the market for 400, they were hoping to get 400 so they can net 378. Tomorrow, if the same house next door went on the market, the sales price is 400, but they say, yeah, I only want to pay 275. That's all I can disclose I'm paying. I could pay less than that, of course, if I want to. But now the seller proceeds have just gone higher. If I'm a buyer's agent, I can always go in and offer 400 and bring my commissions with it. Can I do that, Ned?
Sure.
Yeah.
You can ask and I think we're regularly going to see that now, because the way it's worked in the past is when you are a member of a multiple listing service, you put in an offer of a co-op, and when a broker brings the buyer, you've accepted your offer. Mm-hmm. That goes away. So now we have to have a separate discussion about and separate documentation about confirming our commission. And I think we're going to start seeing that more and more in contracts, where there's an ask by the buyer, hey, seller, I want you to pay some or all of my broker's commission. And it'll just become one more, just like any other closing cost that gets discussed.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sellers, of course, want to maximize. So they're going to want to be, they're going to want to pay as least amount as they can. They always want to maximize. They want to sell their house and maximize. But in the end, the number one priority they have is sell their house.
Sell the house, right.
So we got to stay with the priorities. They still want to sell their house. They're going to want to take whatever it is that's going to give them the best chance to sell their house. By the way, if you're an agent out there today and you're representing on the buyer side and you have an agreement, make sure we get, as the lender, the agreement, because if it is true, buyer's paying you directly, we have to calculate that in their cash to close, so it gets disclosed in the CD, and we have to verify the cash to close. It gets a little bit more complicated when the seller's not doing it. But by not having that document up front, there is potential appraisal issues. There's just issues, so it's not that big of a deal. But we normally have historically asked you to get us a contract right away, which you do, thank you. Now we're going to tell you that if you have a home buyer's representation contract, send it to us as well so that we can see the full transaction. In fact, all of Supreme is watching this, not our loan officers. All of Supreme is watching this today, because I want everyone in my organization to understand what's going on in the industry so that they all can serve in the best way possible, independent of the role that they might actually play. So I want to tell you about Supreme Essentials, because if I was an agent, of course, this is going to sound self-serving, and in many ways it is, but it isn't. It's a real value offer, because if you'll see the numbers here in just a second, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So what is Supreme Essentials? We offer this to every one of our consumers. We also have lots of agents that are offering it today. Value, part of our value proposition. Supreme Essentials is a budget essentials program for home buyers. So there's a different budget, family budget, for a home buyer because of the cost of owning a home than there is just for a typical budget. You complete that module if you're a Supreme customer, and you complete a Credit Essentials module. Both of them take 20 minutes apiece, 5 quiz questions. You finish that, and by the way, you're not going to fail the quiz. The Credit Essentials tells you why your credit score, not what it is, why it is what it is, and then we'll give you help to improve it, which gets your cost of everything down. The bottom line is, do those two things, and we give $1,000 credit to the consumer. So as you're explaining to the consumer, as a home buyer's agent, what it is you're about to charge them, you can offer them Supreme Essentials and get a $1,000 discount to them immediately as a part of your value proposition offering. And by the way, we have 1,027 agents that have currently co-branded, requested co-branding for our website. Like 750 are up and running with it and marketing this today. We've had 520 customers since February do the program, and we paid $516,000 to consumers to give them credit, $1,000 per, so that they can go to close and get $1,000 credit. Because we're continuing to improve our value proposition, this is out there as an opportunity for any of you to get co-branded on your website. And again, if the bell that's ringing today with home buyers is, I got to create value, more value, this is a simple, easy $1,000 you could give to a consumer rather than it be your $1,000. I'm happy that you could give away my $1,000. We're going to stick around, by the way, for Q&A in just a minute. If you want to start putting questions in the chat, we had this plan today to be here for an hour, and we'd love to get your questions to the extent that there are things that you're curious about that we did not cover. But before we get there, I want to share a new tool that I've talked to Michael about that I think is going to materially increase, because we have spent our time on this topic since March, because you as realtors, by the way, in the 38 years that I've been in this business, have helped pay for my kids' college education. So I kind of love you. And we also have been in partnership with you forever. But we started building a tool that we think, and it'll be available starting on August 17th for all of you. And it's called the Supreme Home Buying Journey. You might be curious about what that is. It is a digital educational tool. So you can give it to your customers. Now they own it. And it will take each milestone of the home buying process. And just in time, they can play a 3 to 4 minute digital tool that's educational in its nature, that gives them the best information about every part of the milestone of the process, how to write a contract, not what they put into the contract, but what does the contract say? How's an inspection? What matters about an inspection? What's appraising a property actually look like? What does it actually mean? What is a final CD? All these things will be done digitally, so your customer will have them. Talking about educational and value add, it's there for you. Platform's going to be searchable. So your consumer, when you give it to them, can go in and search just like they do on Google and say, I'm curious about this. Information is going to be available to them. Just like Supreme Essentials, you're going to be able to co-brand this and market it to your consumers. I think it's game changing. And I think the timing of it with regard to the changes that are going on in the industry are absolutely positively going to be amazing. So we're ready to take some questions. Fire them up. If you have access, send some questions into the chat so that we can take them and answer them for you. And question number 1. Is that a question? Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, no, I saw that. Yeah.
I'm going to be afraid to get space to buyer often with a break. Buying the questions just in there.
So the question is, how are we going to handle the appraisals if the credit to the buyer goes into the contract and it doesn't appraise? That happens, let's face it, in 2020 and 21, it happened on about 20% of all the transactions in America that we had properties under appraising with fees built in. So is it possible that can happen? Sure. Less likely today than it was then. Absolutely, because the way values work is when you're going up in value every day, and we were in 20 and 21, appraisers can only use comparables to work the value. I don't think a 2.5% or 3% home buyer fee is going to materially affect the appraisal business, because usually if it's that close, the value can come into place. But the other answer is it's a negotiation.
When the property doesn't appraise, what do?
You negotiate.
You negotiate.
You negotiate.
And if the seller is motivated and wants to consummate the transaction, you typically work it out.
You do.
Or the buyer figures it out, right? And in the event that that doesn't happen, you go find another house.
So it's not guaranteed, of course, that by you building in your commission into the transaction, property appraised. I will tell you this, that there's going to be a big issue change-wise for the appraisal industry as well. If indeed the majority of transactions wind up with commissions still embedded, then that will be the comparable, and you will not likely have a problem with the appraisal, or you would have had the problem anyway. So if indeed it winds up where 75% of the time home buyers are paying agent commissions, then it might become a more likely problem to have. But to be really candid with you, most of the consumers, 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10 that we see, they don't have enough cash to pay realtors directly these transaction costs. They just don't. And I was asked, can they be financed? The answer I've given everyone, they already are financed. But they're financed in the transaction, but we cannot finance them. Fannie Mae, FHA, VA won't let you finance commission costs separate and aside from the transaction. So they have to be embedded in the transaction for it to actually take place.
Well, and Pat, that's a great point, because I was going to ask relative to that, like worked into the transaction, how, where there's stipulations or the forms that companies or, that guard put together.
Well, it just can't be a line item. And so you can, fundamentally, everything is either being paid, everything is ultimately paid by the buyer and the lender. I mean, whether you line item it or not, people are saying, oh, well, the buyer's not paying the commission. Of course they are. They're paying everybody's commission. I mean, if they don't buy, there's no money, there's no transaction, no deal, and nothing happens.
That was one of the first calls I received, like on March 16th, from a pretty prominent leader in the community, and said, can you finance them? I said, we already do.
Yeah.
They're in the transaction. They've always been in the transaction. So, it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. Michael, do you really believe that a buyer will be happy to pay his agent commission after all their expenses like taxes, lawyers, lending commissions, et cetera?
What I believe a buyer's happy to do is own a home. All right. Fitness. Am I super happy about getting up early in the morning and going and working out and eating healthy? Well, not all the time. But am I happy to be fit? Yes. So what I believe a buyer is going to be happy to do is to buy a home, right? And what I know for a fact is that buyers need help in going through the transaction of finding the right home that fits their criteria, that meets their needs. And they're very emotional during the time that they're buying a home, selling a home too. And I know that they need that representation. So
we live in a digital world. Consumers know that they don't have to use a realtor. Last year, 89% did. Today, with the advent of, availability of information through Google and otherwise, YouTube, you could actually be your own agent, but that's not been what we've seen take place, because there's been value placed on the individual agent's services. And that's why people haven't not chosen to go down that road. At least in my opinion, that's been the case. So to the extent that changes, I don't think people aren't happy to pay anything these days, but they do when they want something, right? I mean, that's just the way it is. Ned, can the buyer commission be posted by seller agent on Showtime?
I hate giving answers that are, it depends. Lots of people tend to think of legal things as being, black and white, yes or no, that sort of thing. And it's not always clear, especially we're in an area like this where things are developing and new rules are coming out. I can tell you that what the NAR settlement agreement says is that you won't put your co-op commission into a multiple listing service that's broker owned, and you won't put it onto an aggregator site. What is an aggregator site is undefined in the settlement agreement. Nobody knows. How are we going to find out about what it is? The way we tend to do, someone gets sued, and then we get a decision, and it goes up on appeal, and we get a decision, and eventually we come up with an answer.
So earlier when I asked you, is this legal issue settled? No. The answer was no. And the answer is no.
Still no. It's unclear.
We're going to get an awful lot of, in the new practice, we're going to get an awful lot of challenges that are going to be made, just like any law.
Yeah, and it's it's even more complicated here because these are all NAR rule changes. It's not state law. It's not Georgia Real Estate Commission regulations. It's just something that's part of the NAR rules. And so to what degree that's going to get challenged and by whom are also open questions. We don't know.
So Ned or Michael, based on the 2-click concept, where the buyer would click on a site and be directed to another where you can disclose commission, is that something you've heard of?
Yeah. So let me tell you what I know about it and a lot of what I don't know about it. There has been, because you can't have a commission, you can't mention the word commission in a multiple listing service. So the question is, well, what if you just have your website in there? Private remarks, public remarks, what have you. You have your website and you click on your website link. It takes you to your website, and the splash screen that it takes you to says, I am paying a 3%, 6%, 50% commission, whatever it may be. Is that okay? Or is it one where you have to do 2 clicks? It takes you, the first click in the multiple listing service takes you to your website. Then there's a second link on your website that you have to click to find out the commission. There is nothing in the settlement agreement that talks about 2-click solution. I've heard lots of speculation about it. I've heard lots of talk about it, but I haven't, and I've talked to NAR's lawyers and nobody knows exactly. I think it is from the belt and suspenders department of, hey, if it's just a click on the website, on the multiple listing service, and it takes you directly to the commission, maybe that's a little close. Maybe it's better if we have 2 clicks. I tend to be a belt and suspenders person from a liability standpoint, since most of what I do is defend brokers and agents. So I'm good with the 2-click solution, if you will, in order to add that little bit of buffer, but I'm not aware of it being an actual requirement.
$418 million. That was the number I heard. That was the settlement, right? So yeah, I'd be careful. I would just get Ned's advice or a lawyer's advice before you do anything. But I think, like any other law, there's the law and then there's the spirit of law. Yep. And the idea of complying with that will ultimately be challenged at some point by competitors. Isn't that what we talked about?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I don't think we'll see how it plays out, but I don't think a lot of the people who are going to be reporting violations are necessarily buyers or sellers. I think it's going to be the competition in the marketplace. We see that a lot with RESPA, where it's not that consumers are out there reporting folks to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for RESPA violations. It's usually your competition.
So if an offer comes in with broker compensation agreement as an exhibit and the seller sends a counteroffer, does the seller need to sign the exhibit as part of the contract?
So one of the GAR forms that's out there, I think 259 that talks about commission, who's paying it, and it's one that's going to be, this form will evolve over time as they tend to do. It is only binding on whoever signs it. So in many cases, it's going to be the seller who needs to sign it, because in many cases, I think we're going to have the seller, an offer is going to come in from the buyer saying, hey, seller, I want you to pay my broker a commission. And so the only person that actually needs to sign that is going to be the seller, because they're the ones paying the commission. So for example, the listing broker wouldn't necessarily need to sign it because they're not paying anything. It's coming from the seller. So it's a question of whoever is selling it. So a lot of that is also going to depend on one of the changes that I think is going to come from all of this. And I jokingly say this, so take it with the grain of salt it's meant, is that one of the things that's going to change is that agents are going to do one of the things they seem to not want to do, which is talk to each other early and often. And so you may have this all ironed out long before you even get to that stage. You may already have a separate commission confirmation agreement between the 2 brokers that's already resolved before we even got an offer. So a lot of the answer to this question is a lot of it depends on what we've already got established. If we already have a commission sharing arrangement set up between folks, then this becomes unnecessary.
So there's a question that if a buyer can't pay the commission, they don't have enough cash. And like I said earlier, that's 3 out of 4 buyers. Yep. And the seller won't agree to pay it. What then? I would say to the audience is that if I were a listing agent, I'd make sure that that sellers were disposed to understand that about 4 out of 10 consumers in America, it's not whether they want to pay the commission directly to their agent. They don't have enough money to pay the commission directly to the agent. So you're going to be shrinking your marketability by listing the property. And of course, we have to comply with the law, so the agent compensation has to be listed. But if the seller is unwilling, forget it, doesn't want to negotiate about paying it, you're going to be cutting off a lot of marketability of that product.
Yeah.
Simply because there's a lot of consumers that just don't have enough money to pay the down payment and then their closing costs, whatever costs, taxes, moving, they got to go move, they got to pay insurance costs, everything else. And then they got to go pay another 3% or 2.5% for commissions. I can tell you, because we finance them all the time. Last month, we did 330 transactions, and probably 150 of them were first-time home buyers who just had enough to close. Those consumers could not pay the commission. They just couldn't do it. So the seller is going to have to accommodate that if a commission is going to actually get paid.
For sure. And curious in your thoughts on this, Michael. In my mind, when I envision this, and I'm a recovering realtor, it's been 34 years. The shaking used to be better, and that's gotten worse. But what I envision the conversation being with the seller is something along the lines of, seller, you do not have to legally offer to pay the buyer's broker. But let me ask you something, seller. You're the owner of the home, so I assume you bought it most likely instead of inheriting it. Do you remember when you were at the closing saying, wow, I have so much extra cash lying around, I don't even know what to do with it? No, you didn't. So think about your buyers. Do you think they're going to have the extra cash lying around to pay for their broker? And the answer is likely no. Similarly, seller, do you think there are other homes in the market that might compete with yours? And if you say no, then I'm not the agent for you because you're not being realistic. And let's say there are 3 homes that are similar, and one of them is offering to pay the buyer's broker a commission. Now along comes the buyer. Which of those homes do you think they're more likely to make an offer on?
Well, one of the things in our business, and the crowd may or may not be aware of this, is that from an appraisal standpoint, which is governed, oversighted by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and FHA and VA, the general principle is to never impede marketability. And so whenever you do anything that reduces the potential number of buyers for that property, you reduce the value of that property. So if in the next market we're going into, if sellers just say, no way, no how, I'm only paying the listing agent's commission, you will impede marketability because there are a number of buyers that simply don't have the cash to otherwise pay the buyer's commission. They will need to negotiate into the transaction. Doesn't mean you don't get paid as a seller. It just means that the financing of the transaction will increase the loan balance so that the buyer's agent commission can actually get paid. That's, in the practical sense, the conversation, because when this first came up, I had a number of owner brokers call me and say, well, we're just going to have the sellers pay less commission. I said, well, you can do that, but you'll impede marketability. And in the end, impeding marketability is not best for a seller. Sellers want as many buyers as possible and then negotiate with them, right? Get the best deal you possibly can, because they want to do 2 things: sell a house, maximize the outcome. One more question we'll take. How about that? Ned, you bring it home.
All right. If the seller initially lists with only compensating the listing agent, and after a period of time, the seller doesn't get offers or offers to meet its expectations, wouldn't discrimination if after the 3rd offer he decides to pay commission? No, it's not. I mean, discrimination deals with treating somebody differently based upon any of the 7 protected categories under fair housing. I would treat this the same, and this is also one of those conversations. I have lots of conversations in my head. Usually I keep them to myself because people worry. But one of the conversations I picture having with the seller who says, I'm not offering the buyer's broker to pay them anything. I envision that as the same way as the seller who says, I'm not listing my house for less than $1 million. And you know it's not worth $1 million. And you say, well, okay, look, I'll tell you what. I'll list it for you on one condition, that we agree right here and now that if we don't have an offer within 2 weeks, we're going to have a conversation about reducing that price. So similar conversation. Seller, if you don't want to pay a broker on the buyer side, that's perfectly fine. It's legal. We can do it. And I'll list your property, but I have a condition with you. If we don't have any offers that come in 2 weeks, we're going to revisit this issue.
You know, this seems to be a home buyer's agent issue. But the more we talk about it, it's not. It's a home seller's agent, home buyer's agent, and getting the folks that we represent on their journeys fully educated about the change so that they can do for sellers and buyers what they've always done, which is to provide an incredible professional service, which is really the history of our industry. I mean, home buying and selling in America is the American dream, as we started with today. And the satisfaction rates are really high for sellers and buyers with their real estate agents. And this is just a substantive change that we just need to be educated. Hopefully today helped all of you in some way. Hopefully you have 1, 2, 3, 4 takeaways so that you have more information that gets you better prepared. As we heard today, get started immediately. If you're going to wait till August 17th, that's okay as well. This won't be our last program. We feel like this dynamic. A month from now, there'll probably be some real live fire in the marketplace, and we'll see some things that are actually happening. It won't be about what's going to happen. It'll be about what's happening. And then we'll come back and we'll meet with all of you again and offer to you the best information you possibly can so that you do the best work you possibly can in representing your buyers and your sellers. I want to thank you for being here today. Michael, thank you so much. Ned, thank you so much for your expert voices being here today. And God bless all of you and good luck to you.